So, have you ever noticed how when economists and environmentalists talk about climate change, it's like they're speaking totally different languages? I mean, they both want to solve the problem, but their approaches are worlds apart. It's a really fundamental disagreement, and it shapes pretty much all of our climate policy. Today, we're going to decode it and see if we can find a path forward.
And this quote right here, it just nails the central conflict. On one side, you've got this call to use the market. Find the most efficient, cost-effective solution. And on the other, you have this urgent plea to put safety first, to protect our natural world at all costs. They're aiming for the exact same goal, but they're using completely different roadmaps to get there.
So a lot of people think this is just a simple money versus the planet debate, but it's way deeper than that. It really comes down to their fundamental goals. Economists are all about optimization. They're asking, what's the most efficient path? How do we get the biggest bang for our buck? Environmentalists, on the other hand, are focused on minimizing risk. They're asking, what's the safest path? How do we avoid a catastrophe we can't come back from? It's a clash of worldviews.
Okay, so first up, let's crack open the Economists' playbook. Their number one tool is kind of like a financial time machine. It's designed to help us make decisions today based on the consequences that are going to unfold decades or even centuries from now.
And that tool has a name, the social discount rate. The easiest way to think about it is like an interest rate for the future. So a high discount rate basically says $1 today is worth way more than $1 in 50 years. That makes future climate damages seem smaller, less urgent. But a low rate says, hey, the future is almost as valuable as today, and suddenly those future damages feel a whole lot bigger and more immediate.
And this discount rate isn't just some abstract number. It translates directly into policy through something called the social cost of carbon, or SCC. That's the dollar value of the harm done by every single ton of CO2 we emit. And the EPA's latest estimate, which uses a much lower discount rate than they have in the past, puts that number at a pretty hefty $190.
And wow, is that number sensitive? Just look at this. At a 2.5% discount rate, the cost is $110 a ton. But if you drop that rate by just 1% down to 1.5%, the cost literally triples to $330. This is the absolute heart of the debate. I mean, just a decade ago, some models were kicking around a cost of maybe $31 a ton. Today's number implies we need a way more aggressive policy response.
All right, now let's flip the script and look at it from the environmentalist point of view. They'd argue that focusing on these averages and discount rates completely misses the most important part of the story, the risk of absolute, irreversible ruin.
They're laser-focused on what experts call fat-tail risks. These are the wild cards, the low-probability but incredibly high-impact events, like an ice sheet collapsing. They argue that climate damages aren't a straight line. They don't just get a little worse with every degree of warming. Eventually, you hit these tipping points, and the whole system can just change in ways that are catastrophic and that we can never undo.
And look, this isn't some far-off hypothetical. We are already paying the price for a more unstable climate. Just in 2024, global disaster losses hit over $320 billion. But here's the really scary part. Less than half of that was actually insured. That means hundreds of billions of dollars in damages were just absorbed by people, by businesses, by governments.
And the data on this, it's pretty sobering. Research shows that our economic productivity actually peaks when the average temperature is around 13 degrees Celsius. After that, it starts to fall off. And projections from the U.S. Congressional Budget Office are even more stark. They say there's a 5% chance, basically a 1 in 20 roll of the dice, that climate damage could shrink the U.S. economy by a whopping 21% by the end of this century.
So, okay, we've got these two really powerful but very different arguments. What happens when these big ideas leave the classroom and crash into the messy, complicated reality of actual politics and policymaking?
Well, let's take the economists' go-to solution, putting a price on carbon. The reality on the ground is kind of a mixed bag. Right now, only about 24% of global emissions are covered by any kind of carbon price, and that means a full 3/4 of all emissions are still being pumped into the atmosphere for free.
But wait, it gets even crazier. Even in that slice of the pie that is priced, it's almost never high enough to actually make a difference. The World Bank crunched the numbers, and they found that less than 1% of global emissions are priced at a level that would put us on track to meet the Paris Agreement goals. Less than 1%.
And because of this political reality, we've seen totally different strategies emerge.
The European Union has gone all in on carbon pricing with its emissions trading system, which brought in almost 39 billion euros in 2024. The US, on the other hand, has pretty much avoided a national carbon price. Instead, it's using massive subsidies and tax credits through the Inflation Reduction Act to try and pull clean tech into the market.
And if you want a perfect, almost painful example of how this plays out, just look at the recent story of the US methane fee. A really powerful fee on a super potent greenhouse gas was passed, starting at $900 a ton, but before it even had a chance to fully kick in, Congress voted to repeal it. The lesson here is crystal clear. It doesn't matter how smart your policy is on paper if it can't survive the political winds of the next election cycle.
So, after all that, where does it leave us? It feels like we're stuck, right? Well, it suggests that maybe we need to get past this either-or debate. We need to embrace a both-and strategy, one that takes the smartest ideas from both sides and actually grounds them in the real world. And any real solution has to start with a serious reality check about our energy system. The fact is, around 80% of the world's primary energy still comes from fossil fuels. Now, the good news is renewables are getting cheaper all the time, they're totally cost competitive, but the challenge is that a reliable grid isn't just about cheap solar panels. It requires massive investment in transmission lines, in battery storage, and in power that's available 24/7.
So, putting it all together, what does a pragmatic playbook actually look like? Well, you could break it down into 5 key moves. Number 1, price carbon. Get those prices up to a meaningful level and cover more than just a quarter of emissions. 2, build clean stuff fast, but also invest in the grid to make sure it's reliable. 3, go after methane, relentlessly, with policies that can actually last. 4, make it fair. Recycle the revenue from carbon pricing back to people and help communities adapt. And finally, number 5, measure what actually matters. Track the economic costs right alongside the ethical and social impacts.
So we started with this question, right? The cheapest path or the safest? But maybe that's the wrong question to be asking. The real, grown-up challenge is finding the path that's all 3. Reliable enough to power our lives, affordable enough to not break the bank for families, and fast enough to avoid the worst-case scenarios we've been talking about. Getting that balance right? Well, that's not a contradiction. That's a plan.